stimulative conditions. Then the question is, how stimulative they need to be. Remember that when we placed interest rates at 2, we were envisioning a scenario that never happened. People were talking about negative growth in the magnitude of 8-9%. Some people were saying inflation was going to be as low as 1.5%. None of these things materialized. So it's not adjusting inflation for what we think it should be compared to the neutral rate. It's recognizing that the interest rate that we have now was set up for conditions that never materialize, and that we need to move rates but still be on stimulative grounds. And that's why we mention the partial normalization process.
Central banks in developed economies have pledged low interest rates for longer. But how much time do you expect Brazil and other developing nations to have before big central banks start turning the tide?
I think we have a process in place in which all this new stimulus and everything that's happening is repricing the probability of inflation in advanced economies, and that has an impact in emerging market countries. It doesn't mean that you're going to see a surge in inflation in developing advanced markets. What it does mean is when you look at markets, they are seeing that things are starting to happen in the same window of time, which is you have more stimulus, you have the vaccination, which enable the countries to reopen the economy, and at the same time, people question more and more the ability to do an organized exit strategy. So if you take these three elements, what the market is doing is repricing inflation in the advanced economies, and you can see that looking at the break-even in the US and some other countries. And what that does is has an impact on emerging market countries because commodities are rising. With commodities rising, what you do have is an impact on inflation on emerging market countries. Remember that contrary to the past, now you have commodities rising without the currencies of emerging market countries appreciating. So that feeds into an effect, and what we see.
We do have the Westpac Consumer Confidence Index for Australia just crossing the Bloomberg for April. We do see a significant improvement coming in at 118.8, up from 111.8 in the previous month of March. We have seen consumer confidence steadily recovering here in Australia as economic activities really resume and state borders have reopened. But of course, the slow pace of the vaccine rollout, the issues with the AstraZeneca shot not being administered to under 50s are causing some concern concerns when it comes to economic sentiment. The consumer confidence seasonally adjusted month-on-month number for April at 6.2%. Again, a big jump from March's 2.6%. Well, turning to Japan's data, machinery orders fell in February for a second straight month. Virus restrictions in the country continuing to weigh on economic activity. Core machine orders are a leading indicator, of course, of capex. Let's get more from our Bloomberg Global Economics and Policy Editor, Kathleen Hays, who's got our next guest, who has more of a Japanese economic outlook for us, Kathleen.
Certainly does, Heidi. Thank you so very much. And, of course, we're referring to Ranil Salgado. He's the IMF Mission Chief for Japan and Assistant Director at the International Monetary Fund. We're very happy to have you, and the timing's great because we just got that machine tool orders report. As you know, second month in a row, machine tool orders are down. They were supposed to rise modestly, down 8.5% on the month, 7% year over year. And that's after the Tonkin survey got optimistic for the first time since 2019. Is this just another sign of how damaging it be not getting the virus under control? And I guess in this case, that it could even hurt new investment?
Good morning, Kathleen. Thank you. So it is, I think, a concern, particularly related to the first quarter growth numbers in Japan. And we do have, this is a period in which Japan was in a state of emergency. We still have a relatively positive outlook on Japan, and that's based on a very strong rebound late last year, along with the stimulus measures that Japan put in place in December. And then finally, we expect stronger global growth, but that offset by exactly what you mentioned, the potential related issues related to the evolution and control of the pandemic. And I think these numbers partly reflect the fact that Japan was in a period of a state of emergency in the first quarter of this year.
And in fact, they extended the emergency, so that certainly has something to do with it. But broadly speaking, vaccine rollout in Japan it's been slow compared to other developed, rich nations. Now we've got J&J's usage being temporarily halted. 6 out of 6 million people develop blood clots. But now we wonder about vaccine hesitancy, if that increases. Does the slow rollout of vaccines and perhaps even the populace being a little bit more reluctant now, does that delay the risk of a full-fledged recovery?
So I think, rollout of the vaccines is quite important, and that is one of the main factors that would mitigate some of the downside risk related to COVID. Japan is behind many of the developed, advanced industrial countries. About 1% of the population has received at least one dose of the vaccine. And what we understand is it's primarily due to supply constraints. The one vaccine approved so far in Japan is the Pfizer one, and Japan needs to import the Pfizer vaccine primarily from the European Union. Mm-hmm. Japan does have domestic production agreements for the Moderna the AstraZeneca and the Novavax vaccines, but those are not yet approved in Japan.
Okay.
We do understand, though, that from the government that starting in May, the number of doses available will increase substantially. So we hope to see that come through.
In the meantime, do you see Japan putting together an additional budget, given that there has been the reintroduction of some stricter measures?
So right now, we still in our baseline, we're assuming that the economy recovers starting in the second quarter, which is right now. But of course, we're monitoring the situation with a potential fourth wave. And if a fourth wave does occur, we think there is scope for further measures similar to what was done in December, meaning targeted towards affected households and firms, and as well as targeted towards the recovery process. So in the December budget, we had steps towards digitalization and towards climate change issues. So something similar, and particularly targeted to those vulnerable households.
So you're saying that another budget is possible depending on how the recovery goes. Looking a little further down the road, I guess it's the other side of the budget coin. Once the recovery is solidified, do you see any tax hikes that Japan could make to improve its fiscal position?
So once the pandemic is over, I think the focus right now is to ensure the pandemic is, we get through the pandemic. We don't want any premature withdrawal of